Welcome back to the Talking Hedge. I'm Josh Kincaid, capital markets analyst and host of your cannabis business podcast. Today, we've got the founder of Arcview and chief strategist, Troy Dayton. Troy, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks for being here. I got some kittens that might be joining us for the podcast from time to time.
Bring them, more the merrier.
Yeah, right.
So you've been in the industry for quite a while. Arcview's been around. Tell the audience who isn't familiar about Arcview and what you guys do and what you offer.
Yeah, so we're the first and the largest group of cannabis investors focused in this sector, and also the producers of the most quoted market research in the sector. So we've been gathering investors and entrepreneurs for over 10 years in this sector. So most of the companies that you hear about at some point have raised capital through Arcview's network of thousands of high net worth investors. Everything from Ease to Forefront to Medicine Man to you name it, Akerna or MJ Freeway. Tokyo Smoke. They've all been on our stage and have all been on our platform and raised capital, usually at those early phases. And so whatever's going to be big soon is probably on our platform now.
Awesome. And so you've got the State of Legal Cannabis Markets, 8th edition. Obviously, your reports are highly viewed. You guys have a good insight into the industry, having been in it for over half a decade. So tell me a little bit about this summary. I know everything is changing, and we're going to get into that and transition in a moment, but I kind of want to give everybody an opportunity. This link will be in the show notes, by the way, for anybody who wants to look at it. But what is the state of the legal cannabis market?
Well, we were the first to put out a market report on the cannabis sector back in 2011. And hey there, projecting the growth of the market. And a few years ago, we partnered with BDSA because they've got really great to the level POS data. And so we decided to take that and really work with that on building that into a larger, much more robust report a few years ago. And so now we put that out every year. We do a mid-year update on it. And then we're also putting out very issue-specific market reports every month. So we just did one on branded cannabis. And then this is the 8th edition of the State of Legal Cannabis Markets. And anyone can download a free executive summary of it. Of course, the full report goes much deeper. People get downloads that they can use in their own presentations, etc. But the big gist of it is that there's a real bright spot in the cannabis sector compared to the rest of the economy. And all the trends are in the right direction. Grew over 40% last year in retail sales, global retail sales, and expecting to grow 38% again this year. And we're looking at over 5 years, about a 23% compound annual growth rate to be over $40 billion over the next 5 years annually by the end of that. And so that's remarkable. And when you'll never see another market that's growing at that clip with valuations going in the other direction, going down. And so this is kind of a heyday renaissance right now for cannabis investors and for people looking to really get good values on companies. But of course, it's a very, it's fraught with peril because there is such a dearth of capital and because there's a real shakeout happening. And then you've got each state regulation and the federal government and interstate commerce and international commerce and all of this stuff are banking. There's so many variables, and that makes it very, very hard to make the right bets in this space. But somebody's going to make a whole lot of money.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's transition into that. I thought maybe it would be a fun opportunity to take a look at what people were projecting in December of 2018 and look back at the
Mhm.
predictions for 2019. So crystal ball predictions for 2019 in terms of investment trends were multi-state operators, data, and consumption lounges. Now, some of those didn't come to fruition, like consumption lounges. And then some of
Mhm.
the specific investment drivers were supposed to be vape, accurate dosing, and beverages. So
Mhm.
from that crystal ball prediction, given the grain of salt, given the fact that everything has changed due to this virus, how well did this come to fruition at the end of 2019? Are some of these still in play? Is it just totally out of the blue?
Well, certainly, multi-state operators are a big trend, but they were massively overvalued in 2019. At least in the beginning part of 2019, it started to fall towards the end of 2019, and then dip even further in early 2020. But now they're kind of coming back up. We've seen a lot of them start to, the ones that are doing well, that dealt with their capital properly and weren't crazy overvalued, are starting to come up. A lot of the smaller ones, the bigger ones, not doing so well. And so I think that was pretty accurate, though, that is a big trend. People are still focused. Well, it's changing a little bit, but focused on cultivation and vertical integration and multi-state operators. So that's fairly accurate.
Mm-hmm.
Consumption lounges, though, that didn't see much investment in consumption lounges. There's a lot of talk about consumption lounges, but I didn't see that really take off.
No, not at all. In fact, there's still a felony in Washington state for the maintaining and operating a marijuana lounge.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I came out of the industry, out of Capital One, to open up the Seattle Superchronic Cafe, within 3 months, they had slapped that felony on marijuana lounges. So I pivoted. But 5 years later, we're still working on it. I think it's going to get delayed, though, again, for something that's maybe for delivery. Delivery isn't legal in Washington. So that'll get fast tracked while other bills get pushed back. So yeah, consumption lounges definitely haven't been taking off. Even from all of the bills I've studied in Alaska and Colorado, Nevada, California, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Illinois, none of them have opened up with the exception of San Jose and San Francisco.
Yeah.
So maybe still an opportunity. I think the shops that are next to, like the head shops next to rec stores, I think that they have a strategy of turning those into a cannabis cafe, and that's been a long-term play. Some of that has to do with 280E, selling CBD
Mm-hmm.
products, but I think most of that is a strategy for consumption lounges. But we'll just have to wait and find out. What about data and vaping? That's a good combination for accurate dosing. You could have a hardware and software. Like if you have a vape pen and I hit it and I want to have the same terpenes or CBD THC
Mm-hmm.
ratio, and I just put in all the ingredients, and then that data, I say, I smoked Troy's pen and I really liked it, then that data could then be picked up on my phone and converted to the hardware and then have that same experience.
Yeah, I mean, certainly theoretically, this is a great idea, and there has been some investment in it, but I don't buy it. I just don't think that. Like, I think there might be some great, like, deep medical application of that, but for the general consumer that is buying in an adult use state, and even most medical patients just don't need that level of detail.
Mhm.
Uh, and
What about a set
that
of
being
expectations though? Because with alcohol, you know what you get.
right, right. And so there's dialing this in, but see, I question whether, and this is just me personally. I mean, I
Mhm.
think there's validity to these investment trends for sure, but I I think that the cannabis experience is far more subjective than people in our industry like to think it is. Now, the science could prove me wrong, but I think it's a much more subjective experience. Um, that doesn't excite people who are wanting to find different ways to create new markets. But I think it's much more idiosyncratic.
I would agree. I've even found a lot of people with ADHD are uplifted from indica. So very similar to like Adderall, it has like the opposite effect of somebody
Right.
who doesn't have it. So it's very subjective.
Yeah.
During this whole crisis, edibles have really taken off. The expectations that 2019 beverages would be all the rage, and yet in Washington, we had Olala close down. And if you're not selling between 10 and 15 cents per milligram, the average customer is not going to buy a $25 beverage, every day. So a lot of those, they don't have the volume to stay in business.
I've been a long time skeptic of beverages, and here's what I think happens, or has happened, maybe could still be happening, is that the people from alcohol and other beverages really want to get in the cannabis sector. And when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So they say, well, everyone drinks. This is the method that everybody uses to consume things. Here's something people love. Let's, bring them together. It's going to be great. And we know beverages. So let's put a ton of money. And you've got, Constellation putting money into Canopy. You've got all of this incredible amount of investment going into this. But cannabis beverages have been around for a long time, and they've taken up the tiniest, like 1%, 2%, like nothing. And a lot of people say, well, but they weren't very good at making them, and they haven't seen really high quality beverages, right? Well, okay, but you're going to bet a few $1 billion on that when the market for concentrates is like growing at a 70% compound annual growth rate, right? Like that is an area that's exploding. Why are people focused on beverages? It's kind of insane. And it is true that the original beverages weren't that great. But here's the thing, when they make better beverages, and you rightfully point this out, they don't have as high of THC content, because who's going to take 4 sips of something? But people don't want to pay in a ridiculous price for something that's just a single serving kind of thing. So I think they're still working it out. I think there's a chance. There's always going to be a place for it. I think there's always going to be a place for beverages. I just don't think it's anywhere near commensurate to the amount of investment that's actually gone into these sorts of things. I think concentrates are more interesting. I think tinctures, edibles, small edibles, I think makes a lot of sense. Chocolates, these sorts of things. And we've seen that. They've gone wild during all of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, chocolate edibles have gone parabolic during this time.
Yes.
It's huge.
Yeah.
Well, before moving on to 2020 and see what's happening over the last 6 months, I think everything needs to be with an asterisk or corrected on predictions. Anything that you wanted to add to this that you guys looked at, invested in, wish you hadn't, wish you did? Anything you want to highlight?
Well, I think the vape sector is very interesting. We had the Valley crisis where people were getting sick from the underground vapes, and there was a while before we realized that was what it was, and that certainly hurt sales towards the end of 2019 and kind of sent a shockwave through, and valuations dropped and everything. But and then of course with the COVID thing, people are consuming a little bit less of all of that as well. But I think these are just blips in the big scheme of things. I think that concentrates and vaping are the future. Concentrates have incredible shelf life, which really has such an advantage over the other formats, and then ease of use. And then even with dabbing, they're getting way better, much better devices that you don't need, that aren't so scary, and people are starting to learn the joys of dabbing who aren't actually heavy consumers. Like, for example, I enjoy dabbing, and I'm not a heavy consumer. I take one hit like once every 2 weeks, right? So there's a whole new market, I think, opening up on concentrates and vaping and everything else. And I think that's ultimately going to remain a very, very strong and growing sector, because I just think the product is better.
Well, there's a lot of people that would agree with you. Almost 13.5% of the people that I aggregated from. There was probably 100 different predictions from at least a half a dozen publications that I aggregated these predictions. And so number 7 on the list was medical and education, with a lot of concerns. Like you mentioned, the lung issue with vaping happened right as these surveys were being taken, fourth quarter 2019. And so almost 6% of the people predicted that there'd be more medical and education, with a lot more concerns around vaping. And I know there's some platforms in Seattle. We have Top Tender, that's a bud tender education platform that's kind of trying to work on these issues. Have you seen any investment surrounding medical education and concerns that we've had in the past?
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of education. There's a lot of investment in educational platforms. There's such a gap between the public's knowledge and the actual knowledge, and that's changing all the time because there's new science coming out. There's new products. The whole world of cannabis is just it's its own world, and so I think there's a lot of opportunity, particularly when you're working with people's health and things like that. There's just a lot of opportunity at different points in the consumer journey to share things that are valuable and that people will pay for, particularly because their products are moving, right? And whether that's education to the consumer or education to the bud tender, because I think in our sector, we have no sector is like this. There's not a single sector in the world where the vast majority of purchasing decisions get made by a frontline worker at the counter. There's just no other thing that's even close. Maybe like a florist or something, right?
Can you imagine walking into like an auto shop and saying, "Hey, I need something with 4 wheels that's going to get me to work. Can you just recommend a car?" Like that would never happen.
So you've got people, in the cannabis sector, the power that bud tenders have is unbelievable. And so brands need to figure out how to get to them, but also education-wise, you need to figure out how to get to them, because oftentimes the bud tender actually really isn't the person that you want giving advice on what to take to somebody who's an early user, right? Mm-hmm. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here. And I think that there's been some investment in that. I haven't yet seen anyone succeed with it. That's a tough business.
Even Leafly had to lay off like 80% of their employees, and they're a huge educational platform. So it's been a struggle for a lot of those companies.
Greenflower, we're invested in Greenflower Media, and they've been growing and doing a bunch of different things, and have seen a lot of growth. But even still, there's all kinds of movements to figure out the business model and everything else. There's clearly a need. Someone will figure out how to make money on it. I just don't know who's figured that out yet.
Yeah, and I would say as it pertains to this crazy year that we're in, it's probably going to be even more of an investment highlight as they look at CBD. I had an article from Benzinga, I think, about CBD coming from orange peels. And even with the virus, there's been talks in Japan from some scientists that CBD might be able to cure this virus. But between the concerns,
there's a bunch of different research, not just on CBD, but on THC and other cannabinoids, with potential help for COVID. And there's a couple different research projects going on. I'm not one to, tout that something does something, but it's certainly worth looking into. And there seems to be some promising possibilities.
Now, within that prediction, a lot of people were saying that CBD is going to plummet in price. And I think it has from a kilo, maybe, a couple years ago, 2017, a kilo was over $8,000. And then last year, maybe 3,000. And this year it's $200-$300.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's still a ton of room. I actually think that's really good. It's going to make it more accessible and allow it to be in broader uses. But I also think there's a lot of hype in the CBD market. I think that there's just not a lot of standards. And then there's also this problem with I'm not sure that topical CBD even works. You know, it clearly works when taking it, like you know, like you can feel your muscles shift.
I took
You
100
know,
milligram capsules and I didn't feel anything. And I attribute to the brand, not necessarily CBD.
oh yeah, well that's the other problem. That's how many people wind up taking it and think, this doesn't work, and it's because it wasn't accurate. Or taking an isolate instead of something full spectrum. And I've found that the full spectrum stuff is just no question so much better.
That's the entourage effect. That's why you have to have
Yeah.
some THC or something else other than an isolate to have that bioavailability and uptake.
Yeah, what I like to do is take a full spectrum, just CBD without any THC in it, but then take a little dropper of just a little bit of THC in a tincture, and that inspires the CBD, the entourage effect. So I think there'll be some interesting ways to accomplish that.
Yeah,
but,
20 to 1 is a really nice CBD to THC ratio too. 20 to
Yeah.
1 to kind of get that CBD, but without the THC to have some interference with your day.
Yeah, but CBD, man, wow. Holy cow. If that's not the story of 2019, I don't know what is. I mean, holy cow, boy, it really took off. And there's some good and bad associated with that. But ultimately, you know, one trend we're seeing is companies that were focused on THC products, like basically getting out of the THC game. You know, because it's just too like, screw it. We'll just go into the CBD realm and shift back into THC when it gets worked out, if they're in a state that's got a tough regulatory structure. And I think that's the big story of 2019, and is always going to be the big story, which is that you can't really count on governments to do things right. And we've seen that in Canada and in California. This is where a lot of people missed their mark. And you go back to the projections that people were putting in their decks and things like that. They were just counting on these governments to get this stuff more right than governments ever do. And this is one of the things at Arcview Market Research, where I've been working to make cannabis legal since 1995. I mean, I really know the way that these systems work. And we're just far more realistic when it comes to what governments can actually do, how long it actually takes to implement. And then once things are implemented, how long does it take to tweak it, to have all the political battles to actually get it right? And clearly Canada and California were creating the most complex and the most innovative ways of regulating this, and the most complex. And the more complexity, the more there is to go wrong, and the harder it is to change, the bigger the entity involved. And that's what we saw in Canada and California. And so one of the big reasons for the big dip that we're seeing is that California and Canada just did not meet growth expectations, and for different reasons in both places. But that's the real key there. But that should excite investors actually now, because ultimately they're going to figure it out. The market is there, and even still, with everything not meeting expectations, they still grew remarkably. I mean, California had, off the top of my head, our executive summary says, but it's a massive growth, just not as massive as expected.
Well, with the consolidation, I think that provides opportunities as well. There's a lot of players in this space, so get rid of some of that noise and then highlight who's left. I think is going to.
Yeah, and I see that as really unfortunate, frankly. I mean, a lot of great brands that in a free market would have been able to win. And there's some really great brands that are going to get picked up for pennies on the dollar or are going to go out of business. And it's really, it's not their fault. You know, this is a failure of government. It's a failure of regulation and a failure of government. They didn't go after the people that were putting up storefronts and promoting that weren't even paying taxes. They didn't, they made the taxes so high that like it just doesn't compete with the illicit market. They put things in the way of of delivery and access, and made it hard for people to meet things. You know, I mean, you name it. I mean, across the board, it's just kind of not great, and the red tape is beyond.
It's a lot harder than I think a lot of people anticipated. It's been taking a long time, and there's altruistic people in the industry that weren't paying themselves, and I think that's what kept them in. But with the total market collapse and the global shutdown, I'm not entirely sure they'll be around, and it is unfortunate.
But there's a huge opportunity right now
Right.
for people with capital to roll up a lot of really great struggling brands right now.
Mhm.
If they've got, but they're going to need the capital to weather more storms. Just the reality of it.
Yeah, capital or some other advantage. There's places you can go, like Puerto Rico offers amazing discounts for CBD companies. They don't have
Oh, sure. On
congressional.
the CBD front, I was speaking
Yeah,
on the THC front. Yeah. The
right.
CBD, you got lots of options.
Number 5 on the list is cannabinoids and terpenes. And so there was CBDP and THCP that's supposed to increase the speed, almost like nanotech to cross that blood-brain barrier a lot faster. It's going to maybe reduce the number of overdoses, because if you take it, the effects will happen quicker or sooner, is my understanding. So
Yeah, I mean that's edible. I mean that's the problem that's the thing in the way of drinks taking off,
Mhm.
and it's also the thing in the way of edibles in a lot of ways, is the onset, right? And there's been a lot of development in that front, but I think intellectual property around creating faster onset or all kinds of things related to onset and offset, no question. If you've got really strong IP on that, that'll break through. And then the brands that get wrapped around that IP, no question. And then also minor cannabinoids. I mean, we're learning so much about, CBN and CBG and all of these other things. And those can be, I think there's a real possibility for a major breakthrough, both in their applications, but also in their ability to be grown or manufactured in large quantities. And that's part of the challenge with some of those minor cannabinoids. We just haven't done much with them. So it's really a new frontier.
Have you seen anybody take advantage of the benefits in Puerto Rico? I know Consortium just sold their Puerto Rican assets, but not having to pay federal taxes legally in an American territory would be advantageous. Plus their 50% tax credits and 100% tax deductions and the other things that Act 20 provide would make a perfect suitable home for CBD companies or somebody doing terpene research and development. And yet I don't really hear that many companies going into Puerto Rico. Are they just unaware of it, or they just don't want to deal with it? What's your take? Or do you have an opinion?
I just don't, that's just not an area I know much about.
Okay. Yeah, I know that there's some LPs that do have a presence in Puerto Rico to take advantage of those tax benefits, but not enough. So it's my opinion that 85% of CBD companies will fail if they don't have an entity in Puerto Rico to take advantage of that, because you just can't compete. 20%, if you're paying federal taxes and they're not,
Right.
you're not going to be around.
Yeah.
But that could also be a place to provide a place for vape companies to manufacture or do research and development. And that's number 4 on the list. 13.5% of the people that had predictions for cannabis, crystal ball predictions in 2020, said something about vaping. And you mentioned that just a few moments ago about how popular concentrates are. And in a place like Arizona, that's a little bit more conservative in how they consume. That's the number 1. Whereas we see in all the other rollouts practically that pre-rolls are just this huge seller. Not in a place like Arizona, vaping is the way to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think, vaping just has so many advantages. In particular, I think vaping has the benefit of being super easy. But I really think that dabbing actually, I find vaping doesn't really give me the same kind of, vaping a concentrate, just like in a the regular vape pens.
Mm-hmm.
It just doesn't give me quite the same experience as a concentrate.
Mm-hmm.
And as a different kind of, an actual like dab, live resin or rosin and some of these things, these really high quality concentrates, oh, it's a totally different experience. And the slightest bit gets you there. And so I think there's a reason why those kinds of those product categories are growing enormously, because I think once people experience them, they're diehards.
Yeah, I would completely agree with you. It's a very different experience, but it's a matter of convenience. And most consumers are price and convenient driven. And it's not cheap, but it is super convenient. So if you're traveling, a lot of people will take the vape with them. But I agree with you. Having a bong for flower or a rig for concentrates is a better experience overall.
Yeah.
So moving on to number 3, 16.5% almost said that edibles and consumption, including lounges, would make it to 2020. I don't think they're going to make it for lounges this year again.
Yeah.
But edibles, like they nailed that one.
What about online consumption lounges?
I don't know. That could be interesting.
We tried that. We did on 420. We hosted a whole day long kind of thing where we interviewed a bunch of people. It was like the ball dropping in New Year's Eve was kind of our tone of it. And we had this lounge where people were hanging out, consuming cannabis, but it was obviously online and just kind of shooting the shit.
I could see it turning into gamified, like a Sims type thing where you get points and you can redeem those points. And I could definitely see somebody gamifying that.
Totally.
Interesting.
Yeah, we've seen a couple startups that actually had that, but that was back in the day. I don't know if they're still going,
Probably not. All right, number 2, legalization, regulation, and politics. So I mentioned to you that the fast track for delivery in Washington State, I think will happen, whereas the lounges are going to get pushed back a little while. And I think legalization will get fast tracked because you can't print trillions of dollars without having some revenue. So in order to fill that budget deficit, you're going to have to legalize cannabis. And this is the perfect reason for conservative constituents to hear that, hey, we're broke, we need it. And they'll say, okay, I guess they have.
You got it. I mean, let's look back at history and look at how alcohol prohibition was repealed. There was a movement to do it, but it didn't pick up full steam until there was a real need to get us out of the depression, and the need for taxes really sort of put. And when people are struggling in so many other ways, their moralistic reasons for things tend to fade, and they tend to focus more on the economic reasons, which in this case worked out well. And I think we're going to see the same thing here. We already have momentum in that direction. Over 65% of Americans support legalization. Majority of people in both parties support it. And so I think we're going to see that happen both at the state level and at the federal level in the coming year or so, as people start to really think about how we're going to dig out of this mess. And I'm chair of the board of the Marijuana Policy Project, and also board member at the National Cannabis Industry Association. And yeah, I think it's back to the drawing board in a lot of ways. I mean, in the short run, it's about getting safe banking, right? That'll change everything if we can get safe banking. And I think there's a reasonable shot at getting it, but it's not a done deal. But then I think come 2020, I think we need to start really, really focusing on it. And then of course there's some state level stuff that's going to help move the federal government along the way. You remember, Congress is always the last body to do anything. So it's looking like we're going to have a ballot initiative in New Jersey, South Dakota, Arizona. There might be one in Oklahoma. So there's some really interesting opportunities. There'll be one in, I think, Mississippi for medical. So there's going to be some really interesting opportunities at the ballot box, and it's such a popular issue. So I think there's going to be a real opportunity there. And also anyone listening who is, spending any real money in this space, either on a business or on investment, please consider contributing, becoming a member of the National Cannabis Industry Association, donating to the Marijuana Policy Project, because the only way to move this forward is policy. Like, that's what makes this industry grow. changing laws. Okay. And there's still, most people don't have access to cannabis. And it's so horrible to see the negative effects of prohibition on a wide range of populations. And that is really a problem. And we have a chance to change that through this industry and through our involvement in it, but only if you give. If you're just saying those things and not giving, then that doesn't really do it. So I highly encourage anyone listening, even whatever's meaningful to you. I mean, $10 a month, $20 a month, whatever, or it could be tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars to support these things. But we can really open this up, change the world, and really have a lot of meaning with what we're doing if we can make those changes.
Yeah, donate at least $4.20. I'll put a link to MPP and the NCIA in the show notes.
Thank you.
And then number one for cannabis predictions for 2020 was going to be that price and profit was going to be really important. And I think even now more than ever, companies that weren't generating revenue, business plans that were pre-revenue, all of that is gone.
Yeah,
it's focusing on profit.
Yeah, it's a really tough time, I think, for early stage companies that aren't profitable yet and don't have a quick path to profitability. I think it's a tough time because people are investing in companies that are either close to profitability or are already profitable because so much of this industry was being lifted up by venture capital. And that companies that need that, I mean, they're all going to have down rounds. I mean, even companies that are profitable are still doing down rounds right now, at least in the private sector, or at least even rounds. And so what we're seeing is that investors are really looking at distressed assets, turnarounds. Everyone's looking for a deal right now because there's a dearth of capital. They're all looking for a deal. The only companies that are still getting, top dollar are companies that are highly profitable and looking to become more profitable. But of course, as the saying goes, everyone wants to give you money when you don't need it.
Right. So what do you think if people wanted to invest, would you advise going and getting a distressed asset in an existing market, or would you say to roll the dice and go into a new emerging market like Massachusetts or, New York or wherever, Florida, or would you look at, Oregon and Washington and buy those pennies on the dollar?
Wow, I don't feel qualified to answer that, in part because it's so nuanced, right? I mean, business is local, and every situation is different, and it's just a question of how much of a discount you're getting for the struggle. At the end of the day. But I also think that ancillary businesses are really exciting, and we're already seeing that in the public markets. There's been sort of a divergence now between the ancillary businesses that are on New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ and the MSOs and things like that. They have not seen that big lift, but the ancillary ones are starting to see a lift. I mean, up 80% since the stock, Alan Brockstein stock index or whatever's up 80% over since March, right? So it's starting to crawl back. People are starting to get it, but I think they're really focused on ancillary businesses at this point.
So what do you think is going to happen with the remainder of the year? There's a lot to happen, a lot going on, a lot of changes, a lot of uncertainty, and the behavior for purchasing has changed dramatically. We went from hoarding to paying more. We saw in California, minimums were like $120. To get online, you need to spend at least $60, but people were spending twice that and not reducing the number of times they were going to the store. So a lot of people were hoarding, and I think that's kind of maybe over. What's going to happen for the rest of the year? What's your crystal ball say?
Well, I think people really like cannabis. And when you can't buy other things, but you can buy cannabis, and people are spending a lot of time at home and not out at places where they're not allowed to consume cannabis openly, that's going to be great for cannabis. And And I think that's likely to continue. I don't think we're out of the weeds yet on this stuff. I think we're having a little bit of a reprieve right now in most of the country, but the numbers aren't good, and they're likely to get worse in the winter. So I suspect we have another year of being stuck at home at varying degrees, and that's great for cannabis.
Yeah. Sin stocks or vice stocks, whether that's tobacco, alcohol, defensive stocks, cannabis, all increase or have an inverse relationship during economic downturns. So we're already seeing that in cannabis. And I think other sin stocks will do just as well during this kind of economic depression.
Yeah, one thing I do want to mention, and this was pointed out by one of our board members, Cody Sanchez. And I think, well, actually, no, I think she got it from Jason Calacanis, who's a famous investor outside of cannabis. And basically, he was pointing out that the difference between this downturn and the last downturn in 2008, big overall market downturn, is that the amount of capital that's sitting on the sidelines during this one is like 3 times what it was in 2008. So we may see a drop in demand in terms of not necessarily demand for cannabis products, but demand in terms of overall demand because of lower incomes and things like that. But the amount of capital that's sitting on the sidelines is huge right now. And so that means that we may see it, that may not keep these valuations so low. And so I think there's a real argument for saying, don't count on these valuations to go down again. I think that it might be a good idea to get in now because the market just is going in the right direction. Our market is going in the right direction when the rest of the market's going to go in a different direction. So it's a very unique time to be in this space, but it's also very confusing because there's a lot of moving parts and they're moving really, really fast. And that's why it's so valuable to be part of a group of people where you got multiple brains looking at things and from different disciplines and different opportunities. And that's what we're able to help with at Arcview for accredited investors, people who are at that phase where they are looking to place real capital into the space.
Yeah, as a capital market analyst, I look at Arcview, whatever research reports they have, definitely dive into that and see where the industry might go as a leading economic indicator. So I always appreciate what Arcview puts out, and all those links will be in the show notes. But with that, we're going to roll this one up. I want to thank my guest, Troy Dayton. He's a co-founder and strategic officer with Arcview. Is that right?
Chief Strategy Officer.
Chief Strategy. Thank you. What are some links? Where can people find you at?
Arcviewgroup.com, ARCVIEW group.com is a great place to find us. We're also on all the socials, and we're hosting things every other week for general audience, every Wednesday at 1 Pacific, a wide range of different conversations we're having, and then for members every other week. Where we get into actually presenting companies who are raising capital and also have more conversations amongst investors who are looking at various deals and kind of figuring out how they want to play. So that's how you can find us.
Perfect. Well, thanks again, Troy, for being on the podcast.
Yes.
With that, we're going to roll this one up. I'm Josh Kincaid. This is the Talking Hedge. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or don't, and I'm out. Don't forget to smash that like button on your way out and check out these other videos that we've got.